Hey people, welcome to Iridian Games. So, this channel has been up for about 2.5 weeks. It's November 15th, 2019, and I batch released a bunch of terrain videos, but thought it's time to get into a little bit of crafting. So, I looked all along the YouTubes and the internet, and there's a ton of videos on how to build like Tudor-style medieval houses, but I wanted to release something mildly original that I had trouble finding, and the subject of my search was how to do a cross-gabled roof. What does that mean? Well, it's a roof that isn't straight going one way. Not really articulate about this, but most houses I see being built have a roof that's just straight. You know, that's just a gabled roof. This is a cross-gabled roof, i.e. it's like an L shape, comes out at a right angle, or it could have another wing and be a T-shaped, or even like a plus sign with 4 different gables. Anyways, cross-gabled roof. Now, maybe one of the reasons people don't do it is because really it requires some sort of architectural math, i.e. The angle of the roof here and here are the same, but this third intermediate piece is at a completely different angle that changes depending on the length and the dimensions of the roof and a bunch of other stuff. And it can be a pain. So instead of doing math, because I didn't get into this part of the hobby to do math, we're going to come up with a janky rig to figure out how to do it on any building you want to build. So if you're interested, stick around for this episode. There are 2 more. Episode 2 is how to do all the shingles, the bricks, the doors, all the detail work. Episode 3 is painting and weathering. And a note, yes, I know that moss will not grow on every side of the building, but there's a story behind it. And I'd tell you, but I'm sure some of my D&D players watch this. So, yeah, I can't tell you. Let's get started. Okay, let's stop screwing around and make a pimp-ass inn. First thing we're going to need is a dollar store ready board. It's a foam board, so it's foam with 2 pieces of crappy paper on each side. Get it from the dollar store for $1. And see that carpenter square I'm using? Also from the dollar store, also costing $1. So all I'm doing is I'm cutting out a rectangle that's the length of the board, or actually the width of the board, and 6 inches. So yeah, it's like 20 inches by 6 inches or something like that. And then once I get the rectangular piece, I just mark a halfway point, so 3 inches on the 6-inch side, and that is going to be the apex of the roof. Then I get a cutting mat that has a delineated 60-degree angle on it, and it's a really short cutting mat, so I extend the line of the angle with the carpenter square, and then get a second ruler, and by using the carpenter square on the bottom, I just use that to guide my cut. I hope that makes sense, but you know, that's also why I make a video of these things, so you can watch it in case I'm wildly inarticulate and can't explain anything. So yeah, the reason why this roof is 60 degrees is for actually an element of realism, because, you know, it used to snow in Central and Northern Europe, and snow needed to fall off so it didn't cave in the roof. Alright, then I'm leaving, I don't know, a couple inches for the walls. I decide that the walls are too short, so I take a couple centimeters off on each side so that the walls are taller. Yeah, I use a miniature for reference. And that's basically how I decide my dimensions. Okay. Then I'm using that as a template for the next piece. So these front facades are going to be the main supports for the roof. Alright, now I have my 2 ends of the building. I am going to cut out a third piece where the 2 portions of the roof are going to intersect into the cross gable configuration, And I'm not going to cut any angles into this one because the angles will need to be cut later once we come up with our janky rig to figure out, you know, how these two pieces of roof are gonna connect together. Man, I need to get better at describing things. Okay, now once these front and back of the end pieces are cut out, I'm gonna just double check some measurements, and then, well, what am I doing? Hang on. Oh yes, I start cutting out the walls. So I think for this, I decide that the walls are gonna be, what, 3.5 inches on the inside walls, and then on the outside of the building, they're gonna be 7 inches. And I think this building is, the walls are 2.5 inches high. I'd have to check, and it's not near me right now. But anyways, I just cut out the inner and outer walls. Then I check to see how it looks, and I determine that that is an acceptable building size. So we can move on to the next step. Guess I'm checking it twice. Alright, and once that's done, I'm cutting out 7-inch walls because that's twice the length of the inner walls, so it should all match up. And if you were doing, let's say, what am I trying to say? Oh yeah, if you were doing a building that has different lengths of the cross-gabled roof, you'd need to do different measurements for each side, but I'm just using 2x2 of everything. Oh god. Okay, so I decided that the foam board's a little flimsy, so it needs a backing. I tried cardboard, didn't like it, so all I'm doing is putting a second piece of this foam board behind the wall and front facade pieces to just give it a little extra strength, and then I'm just making sure the inside support pieces are about 1/2 inch shorter than the outer pieces so that they can all connect together in a more seamless way. Now, once all the support pieces and then the outer pieces are assembled, I'm just going to attach everything with tacky spray glue. This is Alina's tacky spray glue because it's quick, it's easy. I don't want to turn on the hot glue gun, and yeah. Okay, at this point I realized I forgot to put in some windows, so don't do that. Make sure you carve out your windows and your doors before you put your second pieces on, your support pieces on. And I forget what the measurements are for this, but I think they're like 3/4 of an inch by an inch or something like that. I don't know, they're pretty small. And I'm just marking them out. You don't have to keep the paper on. The paper is eventually going to get peeled out, but I just find it's easier to cut with the paper on. And then I cut out the windows. So these windows are all going to be surrounded by wooden planks for, trim. So if the cuts themselves aren't really super nice, that's okay. And I'm just using that as a template. And I'm doing a really rushed job. This does not have to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Now, if I was going to do a more modern building that wasn't as rickety, I would take a little more time. Now I'm doing the door. My doors are usually, I think, 1 inch by 1.5 inches? Does that sound right? Here, let me check. Anyways, I don't have a template for a good round top door, so I just take a top of one of my significant other's essential oil bottles that has been used, and trace out a circle on the top and just cut that. So basically the rounded top of the door is finished off by the circle of the bottle, and that creates a sort of poor man's template. And there you go. It's okay. It's not perfect, but it gets the job done. And I'm putting in a second door. I tried using this as a template, but it just looked horrible. And to make my life easier, I just made a square door. Okay, then I just hot glue all the pieces together. I do this on my horribly maintained and treated cutting mat, just so I can gauge right angles, because, you know, all the squares are at right angles, and I can make sure that everything's gluing in place in a correct way. And as I begin to glue everything together, I put in some wooden dowels because my measurements were somewhat off when I made the cuts on the inner support pieces. They weren't really matching up, so I filled in the gaps and the spaces between with wooden dowels. All right, now I made another mistake. That third piece of roof support that I cut off, it wasn't wide enough. So I measured the inside, realized that the second piece I cut up to fill that intermediate area was too small again, so third try's the charm, and I finally cut out a piece wide enough to bridge the intervening areas between the inside wall and the outside wall, making sure it's as tall as the two facade pieces, you know, with the angled roof. Okay, now the jig I'm using is I'm just putting some like fast tacky putty on the tops of each roof and taking two straight objects and having them intersect at a right angle on top of the third piece of foam board. Yeah, and then I mark where they intersect, and that's going to be the apex of the roof. And of course I made a fourth mistake and hot glued this in, so I couldn't take it out, so I had to measure the angles while it was stuck in there, which was kind of a pain. So you just measure from the apex to the inner or outer wall with a ruler, draw a line, and then make the cut. Yeah, this is me trying to figure out the least awkward way to do this. And it's a little off camera. Sorry about that. Okay, there's one. And now for the outer wall. Okay, now that will hold the roof up nicely. So how do we do the roof? Well, I'll tell you. So cereal box cardstock is generally not the strongest material or the best material, but when you double it up, it's pretty darn good. So just take that box of crappy mozzarella sticks that you got in a moment of weakness and that you regret launching out into the public sphere by posting it on YouTube. You just take that, cut off all the extra flaps so you have a good workable square without a bunch of fiddly bits on it, and just cut two of those out. And no, I am actually not sponsored by Farm Rich mozzarella sticks. Thank God. Although at this point I'll take anything. Alright, so I'm hitting out with tacky glue again. Cardstock can be prone to warping, so tacky spray glue has a low moisture content, which is good for this. And all I do is place that modified piece of cardstock on the roof and keep it in place, and I just trace out where I'm going to make the cuts. These are going to be covered in shingles, and there's going to be wood trim all over them, so that it doesn't have to be super pretty or precise. And I just cut that out. And this gets, what did I use here? Hot glue. Yeah, this gets hot glued in place. I'm going to put some chimneys on there. The way I'm doing the chimneys is I'm just cutting out something that looks like a chimney from the foam board. After I draw that out, I use it as a template to make a second piece because I want this chimney to stick out. Pretty proud of the building. And then I just glue those two together. And these are going to be covered in bricks. So it's just forming the body, the base understructure of the chimney. Hit that with some more tacky glue. And affix it to what is going to be like the kitchen area of the inn. I assume there's more than one fire in a large kitchen, so I put 2 chimneys in there. Now we're going to make the windows. They're going to stick out with gables of their own from the roof of the main structure. And I hope I'm using these architectural terms correctly. I'm kind of a neophyte, as you can tell, which means for you non-English speakers or non-primary English speakers, it means a person that doesn't really know what they're talking about. All right, and then I just use a template. This is roughly the size of the door. I trace that out and then cut a big hole in the top. Then I use the template of the door to glue a bunch of pieces of foam board together that will fit into this hole that I cut out of the roof and stand straight up out of it. Once that's in place, you can tell that I've carved some wood texture into this foam window piece, and we're going to get to how to do that in a second. But I glue that in there, make sure it stands up straight, and then I go about cutting another piece to form part of the roof. And the way I do that is I get the original angle from measuring by tracing out a design or the angle of the initial roof, and then I just make it a little more steep, eyeballing it mostly, and it fits in there. Then I take a Sharpie, just draw out some lines to represent planks, put some dots in it for nail holes, then take a wire brush and just assert some wood grain into it. You don't need to apply much pressure with the wire brush, you just literally need to use the brush's own weight. Then I put that little triangle for the small little roof up on a single layer of cardstock. Just measure out how much I need by folding the cardstock around the triangle. And yeah, just fitting that in place. Cutting off enough of the cardstock so that it fits flush with the top of the roof. And I just make incremental cuts, eyeballing it the entire way until it fits. I'm sure there's a better way of doing it, but I'm doing it this way. If you know a better way of doing it or a smarter way of doing it, please put it in the comments. I am so down to learn a better way to just craft in general. I don't think it's one of my strong suits. And then I just hot glue that into place. Okay, now I decided it needs some window trim, so I'm just taking some little wooden sticks that I got at Walmart. These are like tiny square dowels, and I'm just putting them in places where I think they'd look somewhat good and realistic, and I'm honestly just using hot glue to put them in place around the window. Just eyeballing all the measurements and the cuts. At first I was worried about these not having a very good wood texture and not being very believable, but it worked out really well, I think, as you'll see in episode 3. Please let me know if you disagree. Using a little super glue, trying not to get it onto the foam because super glue will melt foam. I put another of these wooden sticks across the top. I have to cut a little bit out of the cardstock to fit it in place flatly, and then just hot glue that sucker in there. All right, there we go. Now, what am I doing? Oh yeah, I'm just making another chimney in the roof. Okay, so I'm just cutting out long rectangles, 2 of them, gluing them together with some more spray glue. Doing a similar thing that I did with the window, and that is just cutting out a small hole on the top of the roof. And putting that in there. So you could totally cut these out before you even put the roofs onto the house, but I'm kind of making this up as I go along, so there wasn't a lot of pre-planning, as you can probably tell. And that gets hot glued onto the roof. And we'll be putting stones around the whole thing. And you might wonder, why are there stones and shingles on this thing already? Well, because I get really bored of crafting a lot of the time, and I sometimes have to split up the workload and the tasks so that I don't spiral slowly into insanity. Okay, why is this here? This should be in the second video. All right, but whatever. You're getting a preview. We're going to be making a chimney, and all that stone texture, all the shingles, all the plaster in the second video. Now, and the door, and the window trim and stonework and everything else. So, those steps were how you build the base structure of any foam core building that you want. You know, it doesn't just have to be medieval, it doesn't just have to be fantasy. Same procedures for sci-fi buildings. I love using this cheap foam board because it's so cheap and it's really easy to work with. I hope this was helpful, useful to you. Thanks so much for watching. Like, share, and subscribe, but only if you want to. And most importantly, have a great day.